Kamala Harris and the Longhouse. The Harris campaign is the most overt manifestation of the Longhouse that we have seen in the sphere of American politics to date. Now, what is the Longhouse? The Longhouse is a concept that references actual historical longhouses, large communal halls, which were the main community center for sedentary agrarian people. Many of these agrarian societies built around the Longhouse were said to be less masculine, more egalitarian, and didn't have the same warrior values as their based Chad, conquering nomad neighbors. What's supposed to have happened here in terms of values is that these agrarian people who lived around these longhouses essentially traded the free, independent autonomy and privacy of roaming the plains for the security and oversight of collective living. In discourses online, this is compared to our own modern way of life in the sense that we have increasingly less privacy coupled with increasingly feminine approaches to conflict resolution. Nonconformity is suppressed through being canceled. Direct conflict is generally avoided. And safety, especially emotional safety, that is, not triggering someone, is valued over true and authentic individuality and speaking your own mind. I both like and dislike the concept of the Longhouse because it definitely captures something, but it's still a little vague, and it's both incredibly broad and also absolutely specifically precise. Whoever came up with it first probably thinks they're a genius. But anyway, as this guy writes, and I'll link in the description, quote, "The most important feature of the Longhouse, and why it makes such a resonant and controversial symbol of our current circumstances, is the ubiquitous rule of the den mother. More than anything, the Longhouse refers to the remarkable overcorrection of the past two generations towards social norms centering feminine needs and feminine methods for controlling, directing, and modeling behavior," end quote. Immediately, you can see how this is like the dissident right's more sophisticated conception of the gynarchy or matriarchy concept in red pill/manosphere conversations. So the Longhouse is a metaphor for the feminization of society, but it's also a bit of a deeper exploration of how this process is happening and a more piercing look into this new social reality, our new social landscape. As the Longhouse comes into itself, it should be easy to see how brat is its fullest manifestation in the sphere of American politics to date. The Harris campaign is a vibes-based campaign, and in that sense is a manifestation of the Longhouse because it's an emotional appeal rather than a rational policy discourse, which is unusual for Democrats. Normally, of course, there's spin and lies on the part of Dems, but still an appeal to policy. Brat, however, is a departure from that, and it's really unclear what Kamala even stands for specifically, since she's appropriated so many positions from the Trump campaign, like being pro-gun, pro-wall, and pro-no tax on tips. But anyhow, brat is a word that, much like the Longhouse, escapes easy definition, but the aesthetic of the Kamala campaign and the slogan brat was adopted from this album by the music artist Charlie XCX. Now, brat is used by stupid girls, stupid modern women, and it's used to capture a spirit, an ethos, or a vibe that young women want to have.
Trump or Kamala?
Kamala.
How come?
Because she's brat.
What does that mean?
Google it.
No, but you're right here. I'm asking you.
A brat is a girl who's a little bit messy. She likes to party.
So only because she's a woman, basically? Or what?
I think she has actually really good policies. I think Kamala would actually make this country a better place, whereas I think Trump would make a lot of people sad. Have you seen his 2024 agenda thing?
2024 agenda?
Yeah, he came out with a...
You mean Project 2025? Yeah, he said he doesn't associate with that at all.
He does associate with Agenda 47.
Yes, exactly. No, they're very different.
Well, actually, if you're going to be debating us about politics...
I'm not debating. I'm just getting your thoughts.
It's supposed to signify the fact these young women are supposedly bold, carefree, unapologetic, mischievous, provocative, rebellious, and also promiscuous, while also being confident and risk-taking. It's also associated with so-called queer subculture, probably because raves are, I guess, LGBT now, and Charlie XCX got her start making a lot of rave music. There's this type of young woman, generally millennial or younger, either having dyed hair or some other ridiculous ugly haircut, those dumb stencil tattoos. She's friends with actual lesbians or gay guys, and may even be bisexual herself, and she's a raging leftist. So now when Kamala uses brat, this is the demographic she's appealing to. But as it relates to the Longhouse is manifesting itself in the Harris campaign because the adoption of brat by the Harris campaign is how she is signaling to these women that she is challenging or disrupting traditional power structures and telling them that she's going to upend the status quo, despite being the most deep state candidate in history. This is signaling to these women that this is the rise of the matriarchy, in a sense. These young women with this brat identity have this dysfunctional, unstable femininity, and they have this pathological aversion to all male social and political authority, and their values pervade basically every major institution in modern life. Definitely the modern workplace, where women who are brat or brat adjacent, since true brats are still kind of young at this point, are wildly overrepresented in HR jobs and determine workplace behavioral norms and heavily influence professional culture, which in turn influences the rest of American culture. This is also why you, as a man, need to learn to do for self. Female bosses are always potentially emasculating, and the modern workplace is a minefield for what you can and can't say. So you should be striving for financial independence and for some sort of job where you can work for yourself and not for someone else, where you're your own boss. Because the Longhouse, that is, women's collective social and political authority, will stifle you and will view you as an inherent threat. They want to squeeze out of you that desire to succeed and achieve. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, they wonder why there aren't enough high-value men out there. Super incompetent, right? And speaking of incompetency, Kamala is super incompetent. Border czar, she wasn't even at the border half the time. She had to use notes during the debate, change all the rules. Super lame. She can't do an unscripted interview without putting her foot in her mouth, and her actual scripted interviews are still very poorly received. Her whole communication style is just to use this fake, vague, civil rights-y language, I guess doing an Obama impression, but not even a good one at that. But that's the other point. The manifestation of the Longhouse in her campaign can be seen in the feminine values of her campaign, in that there's this very overt appeal to compassion and empathy over individualism and strength. There's also this weird undercurrent of sexuality, too. Not as highly publicized and never expressed by Kamala herself, at least not in her public appearances, but still nonetheless exhibited in the Hotties for Harris DNC after party. Watching boomers lose political power like this and having millennials slowly take over is super disturbing in some ways. I mean, there's a genius behind some of these moves, and in the future I do believe that campaigns will all ultimately be vibes-based campaigns, but it's still like, oh man, this is really, really unsettling here. The Hotties for Harris. Like, I'm gonna throw up. And it really can't be overstated how emasculated men have become that this is what we're up against. This isn't some sort of obscure, subterranean social force, not acknowledged by government like some dyed-hair leftist you just meet on the street. The Longhouse will be institutionalized and formalized if Kamala wins.
Taylor's filling us in on some of the DNC highlights since we haven't been able to get into the convention. And what did you get as a party favor?
So, I was at the Hotties for Harris party last night, which was a party a bunch of people went to, and it was like they had like all of these different sort of things. They had like mini golf where like you go mini golf through like a ring of tampons and stuff. And then I went through, then there was like a gumball machine, and I was like, oh, let me turn the gumball machine, and maybe it's like a ring or something. And it was, I have this, it was Plan B. It's a Plan B pill.
And this is also why they've got to promote these faux masculine figures like Tim Walz, who has to pretend he's relatable by playing around with these car filters in this desperate bid, this desperate pitch that appeals to no one. Because it's literally like women, and I'm obviously generalizing here, women plus their simps versus men in this election. The political polarization of the sexes has been noted for some time now. I've done a video on this before, and they will actually castrate us spiritually, psychologically, and in some cases physically if we don't do something about this situation. But to further link the relationship of the Harris campaign to the Longhouse concept, there's also this portrayal of Harris in popular media as a nurturing figure. Rhetorically and in policy, with the few policy positions she does clearly hold that she hasn't flip-flopped on, she's really emphasizing healthcare and so-called reproductive rights. If you look at media coverage, her history as a prosecutor is now spun in such a way that she's supposed to be this protective figure, rather than, incarcerating tons of black men over grams of weed. She's supposed to be, she's not, but she's supposed to be received as compassionate and empathic, as well as strong, assertive, while also being warm and approachable. She's the perfect den mother of the Longhouse, so to speak. I mean, really, she's none of these things, but if you look at what she says and how the media responds to her, this is clear it's what they're going for. She's the caregiver in chief. I mean, she's constantly going on and on with these feminine values, saying she's for the people, for the most vulnerable and the overlooked, all that slave morality, calling for unity and solidarity despite being literally the most divisive president in history ever. Super, super, super duper unpopular. But for a moment, let's take a detour and examine how the Longhouse has impacted male psychology as well as male-female relations in the context of the American left.
Much more happens at the DNC than what people see. Oh,
And I just can't believe this happened to me at the DNC.
oh, I got dick down at the DNC. Oh, dick down at the DNC.
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you for
so
having
much.
us.
Thank you guys.
It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, I'm sure those two will go on to be part of a reliable, responsible, disciplined, and in control political class. Not! 90s burn. And part of what's facilitated this, by the way, this sort of alliance between that one character and the redhead, is women's general inclusion under the umbrella of queerness, right? When you go to a college, it's not just feminist studies, it's women and gender studies. So the institutions in this country have already sort of set things up that young women are primed to be in, as they're already primed to believe in this gender ideology, basically. Let's take a quick look at another video.
Would you rather have a democracy or access to abortions?
Either or. I feel like that's a very tough question to answer. I feel like that's almost not possible to answer. I feel like I couldn't pick one or the other.
Even if you had to choose?
If I had to choose,
Can we get a final answer? I know it's hard.
I guess access to abortions.
It's Brat Summer! The queen of the brats has arrived! Yes, queen!
Do not come.
Are you as hard as I am right now?
All right, this is a good example to illustrate what's in store. They are literally willing to trade their political freedom for the ability to murder their own children. Yeah, that is unfortunately the moral, spiritual state that a lot of women are in this country. It's highly dangerous. They're literally willing to give up their own rights and political freedoms just so they can have the ability to abort kids. Like, awful. Truly, truly awful. And this is what's in store. Kamala Harris is the manifestation of their collective political will. right? Because you know if she gets into office, she'll undo Roe and she'll try to implement some sort of law or dictate or rule that says that it's acceptable to do this procedure up until birth, regardless of whether or not most Americans are comfortable with that. And the fact of the matter is, most Americans aren't. There's some sort of moderate position leaning towards it should only be done on the earlier side. Very few people are, and that's how like sort of ridiculous it is. They play these games. They'll be like, "Oh man, like they were never in favor of up to birth abortions. That's ridiculous that they would ever suggest that." And it's like, yes, they were. Yes, they totally were. These liars who say this are just trying to capitalize on the fact that people are so thoroughly stuck in information silos that they can basically get away with spreading disinfo to people who are already kind of primed to hear their message. It's really quite sad. Anyway. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a comment, share it. I really need your help with that. This has been an explanation of how the Kamala Harris campaign is the fullest manifestation of the Longhouse in American politics to date. I hope it was informative. I hope you had a better understanding of the concept of the Longhouse and how it relates to American society and the Harris campaign, and Red Channels will catch you in the next one.